Hello, everyone. I'm Rosemary Jenkins, the author of the historical fiction novel, The Southern Phoenix. It addresses the Black experience in America during the last century. With me is my sidekick and actor in his own right, Joshua Kim. He and I are going to do a brief table reading of the beginning of the first chapter. So let me set up the scene. John David Johnson, affectionately known as Babe Ruh, is the main character, protagonist. Miss May Emma is his elderly aunt, most beloved, and Udeka Yafe is his son, very young at the time. So let's begin. Udeka Yafe, now just what kind of a name is that? Miss May Emma asked the little boy in her inimitable way, not really expecting an answer. She grabbed him up in her arms and tossed him on her knees and then squeezed him until he nearly lost his breath. Then she laid a big kiss on his cheek. That reminds me of the time I went to kiss that sweet little John David. Did I ever tell you about that?
No, he nodded and looked up at her with big, expectant eyes. He did so love to hear the story she was about to tell. He must have heard it at least 250 times. It always made him bust his sides laughing.
He came in all dusty from the fields one time to cool himself with some of my chunky ice-cold buttermilk. I grabbed that tank of a boy over to me and kissed his chubby little cheek. Well, he was too big for that and slapped me right on my face. I took my hand and whacked him one good. He flew across the room and never did do me that way again. Crocodile tears rolled down his face, making rivers through all that dust and dirt on his plump little cheeks. It was a sight. That poor boy knew never again to do his Miss May Emma in such a way. That story always brought a big grin to his face. He'd smile from ear to ear. She loved his smile, and then she continued. Of course, in them days, we women all looked after each other's children, whether it be tanning their hides or feeding their tummies. While his mama was working elsewheres for the man, why, I'd sometimes keep an eye on him for her. It had hurt her so. To leave her babies behind, but she worked domestic for the white man, sometimes living in his house, sometimes not. It had put a mighty strain on her.
What's working domestic? He asked.
Oh, that's cleaning up after what a body don't want to do for itself. Now, there was plenty of the time his mama would come to me and just break down and sob, but she'd try never to let on to them children. She knowed she had to be strong for him.
But didn't they miss her?
Yes, indeed, but you know, even as little ones, they know they had to be strong for her too. Yet the children wouldn't cry. It was like they knowed if they once did, it'd be like letting the dam loose. With this, she began to shake her head, looking sad, reminiscent. After a quiet moment, he leaned over and gently kissed her, letting her know he understood too. I'm sorry, child, she responded, snapping herself out of her reverie. Forgive an old lady. Seems like my memory started a-wandering off.
That's all right, Miss May Emma, he assured her. Are there any other things you can tell me about my daddy?
Let me see. There's so much, you know. It must be something like at least 40 years ago. We was deep in the Depression down here in Saugus County. Nobody had nothing but their health, and some of us didn't even have that. The air was clear and pure, though. Of a night, you could see 1,000 stars in the sky. But Lord, there weren't no street lights out here in the country then, and you couldn't see the hand in front of your face when you was a-walking in the night. There wasn't a lot of anything, not really much different from today, except a bit more modern now. Just a single-lane road meandering through the countryside. Joshua, I know that you've read the book and you probably have some questions for me. So if you have one, I'd be glad to answer it.
Yes, I actually do have a question.
Great.
Later in the book, they talk about housing segregation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That is a great question, and it's a very complicated one, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. Back in 1975, when my husband, who is black, and I got married, we were looking for a house to buy. And during that time, the laws were changing, but prior to that, and even after that, there was collusion between the federal government and the Federal Housing Administration, the realtors and the developers, to make sure that neighborhoods either stayed all white or all black. So there was something called redlining, and literally on a map, they would draw a red line around certain areas and say, okay, everybody inside of these red lines is going to be white only. And everybody inside of these red lines will be black only. And that, applied to other minorities as well. And sometimes it would be a brand new neighborhood. No one, new homes, no one had ever lived there. So it really was neither black nor white or anything else, but this redlining, they would decide ahead of time. And I know back in 1975 when we were deciding to buy a particular home, I would be the one that would go into the bank and fill out the papers and have everything set. And then finally, when it would be the last signing, then my husband would come in, because we didn't want any problem, because we were both aware that there were problems like that. And restrictive covenants is something else. For instance, in the San Fernando Valley where you and I live, San Fernando, it's a Spanish name, the land was largely owned at one time by people mostly from Mexico, and they owned the land, but the new laws were set up in such a way that they were not allowed to sell their own land to anybody whom they chose to sell it to. It would have to be a white family. And so the covenants, which are now totally illegal, were very prevalent in those days, and it was really unfair to the landowners who had maybe through generations owned that land for a long time, and then they were being told, well, you can't sell it, or you can't sell it to a relative or another Latino family. It was pretty difficult. So thank goodness things have changed, but there is something called the Fair Housing Council. And my husband and I were checkers for a long time, and what that is, let's say a black couple wanted to rent an apartment or buy a house, and they had a good income, they were well groomed, there really was nothing that should make them be turned down. But they were. So they would contact the Fair Housing and report this problem. And so what the Fair Housing Council would do would be send checkers out. They would send a white couple and a black couple and a mixed couple with the same educational background, the same income, the same length of employment, etc., to see what would happen. And if that landlord or the seller turned down the checkers because they were a black couple but not the white couple, then the government knew there was a problem. And I know that once or twice my husband and I had a deposition taken by federal attorneys to sue the landlord or the developer or the individual selling a house, because it was illegal at that time. So the laws have changed a lot, but certainly at the time when this book took place, it was not like that.